Good morning and welcome to another Fast Tracks webinar. This is the weekly event we do every Friday at 9 a.m. Central, 10 a.m. Eastern, where we go over various topics of the Fast Track software. You can see a list of these events if you go to our website, FTx.com, choose the FTX Lifeline tab at the top of the page, scroll down just a bit and look for that webinar button, choose that. This next page will show you a list of all of our previous webinars, where you can view the recordings, our upcoming webinars where you can register, and then also a link to sign up for the newsletter to be notified of upcoming webinars and other Fast Tracks news. Today we're going to be talking about a relatively newer feature that was added a couple releases ago for stores in Director when you're managing stores, called Store Groups. So we're going to go to Director here, and I'm in corporate mode. This is going to be most handy in corporate mode. It's where you'd be using this. So normally, whenever you're sending down, whether it be queue records to stores, running reports, things of that nature, you're going to be really utilizing this hyperlink at the bottom left corner of Director where you select your stores. Now before, there was no option to do by group. It was only individually by stores or by price book zone. So whenever you're wanting to run a report, like let's use an example of a department sales report, and you want to run it for maybe just stores 1, 2, and 3. You would go to your reports module, you'd go to your sales reports and department sales, and then you would select your stores. So I would clear this off and then choose stores 1, 2, and 3. You set your filters and time frame, checkboxes, and then print the report. And that would run the report for stores 1, 2, and 3. Well, that could get tedious going through and checking stores one by one, especially if you have lots of stores. And you may not always want to go by price book zone because price book zones, those could be specific to states or regions, and you have your store set up by a different method and different groupings. And that's where the store grouping comes in handy. So to get to stores, we're going to go to our maintenance module, and we're going to go to the stores tab. This has always been here. It's been expanded on recently. And we're going to go over the fields momentarily. We're going to look at the store groups here first, because in order to place stores into groups, we have to first create the group. So I've got 2 groups here already created, and there's always going to be a default group. So if you want to create a new group, just simply choose the new button, create a group, and then choose save. And then that will then add that group. Now, each of these groups, once they're created, whenever you go back to your stores tab and you're viewing a store, you can assign that store to a single group. Now, this may be expanding in the future where you can have a store assigned to multiple groups, but as a rule of thumb right now, in this version of Director on July 10th, 2020, it is going to be 1 store per group. So you can assign a single store to a single group. You can have 20 stores in a group, but you can't have a store that's within group, say 1, also be a part of group 2. So that's how building your store groups work. Now we're going to go over the stores and assigning stores to groups. So if you want to build a brand new store, that same plus button can be utilized. In this case, I'm just going to look at an existing store that's already been created. So when it comes to creating stores, you want to make sure that on the store number field, that is a unique numerical number. So you can't have 2 store 1s. Think of that as like if you're looking in database terms, that's going to be like your primary key. It's a unique integer. Store name, this is what you want to name your store. Now, if you're participating in any of the retail scan data incentive programs, normally this wouldn't matter what you put, but if you're participating in those retail scan data incentive campaigns, this actually really does matter. You could be rejected if you don't have this input properly. And Philip Morris, Arch Reynolds, ITG, they want you to put what is on the tobacco license, that retail store license itself. So what is that store known by on that license? What is that store's address? What city, state, zip, phone number, etc. Now, if you're not participating in those campaigns, this is just extra information you can input if you want. It's not required, but if you're participating in those, this is very, very important. And they want this to be consistent. So you wouldn't want to put like this store where it's using lowercase and uppercase, and then store 2 where it's all uppercase, and store 3 using all lowercase. You wouldn't want to put an abbreviation for your state, as in this case, Alabama, as caps here and then lowercase there. You would get a validation warning and that file would be rejected. The very big thing to take away from this is they expect consistency. So if you're going to be inputting by a certain, using caps or not, you want to be consistent on every single location. All right, so everyone knows what the address, city, state, phone number, etc. that would be. Now the active checkbox. This is going to be if a store is active, open, and being utilized. It also, when this is marked as active, that means that that store is going to show up in this list here, and it can be utilized in reports. It can be seen on the dashboard. You can send messages. That's for all intents and purposes, a open, live, and active store. If you are rolling it in the process of rolling out, you can optionally mark this store as inactive and save it. And then at that point, it would disappear from all those areas. So if you're in the process of rolling out with Fast Tracks, you can go ahead and input all of your stores and then only activate stores as they come online. The price book zone, that's of course going to be the price book zone that the store is assigned to. If you have any questions on price book zones, we have a lot of documentation as well as some webinars on that. This bank code here, this is going to be what's utilized in the change bank for reconciliation purposes. So if you are going to be reconciling your change bank during the reconciliation process, make sure you input this value here, and then that will then be utilized during the reconciliation process for each store. The report tax rate, this is going to be a default value for a tax rate just for reporting purposes if a store tax rate has not been pulled from the store to corporate. So let me give you an example on this. Let's say that I create the store one and I send everything down and they're open for business and they're ringing sales up and they're sending data back to me, and I run a sales tax report. And I will see their tax groups and their tax rates on the report. And it will be based on this percentage here is what's going to be shown as the tax rate being applied. Now, that may not necessarily be true if you actually compare the data itself to that tax rate, because this tax rate here has no bearing on what tax rate's actually being applied at store level. Think of that as like a read-only, report-only column. It will only show up on that sales tax report in a certain scenario. So that store could be set to 9% tax. And when I run that sales tax report, it's showing all numbers that correctly reflect that 9% sales tax being applied. But the report shows 10% being applied because I have 10 input here. Now, I had said that it only reports this if the tax rate has not been pulled from the store to corporate. To do that, which you really should do to make those reports always be correct, is if you're logged into Director as an administrator, choose the settings hyperlink, and then there's this button called Refresh Store Tax Rates. And whenever you press that, Director will sit here a minute, and it will be reaching out via the internet to pull all the tax rates and tax names that's being utilized at all stores. Then at that point, the sales tax report will then reflect the correct name and tax rate, report tax rate, for the data being displayed. So in the case of tax changes, it's always good to be on top of that. Of course, you have to change the store tax rates, but you'd want to go into Director after that tax rate's been changed and then choose the Refresh Tax Rate button here to refresh those values from the store to corporate. If that's never pressed, then Director will default to utilizing this report tax rate. All right, so the next area we're going to look at is going to be the IP address. Think of this as the virtual internet address for a store. So anytime you're sending a queue record down, a message, whatever the case may be, you're sending data from corporate, it's going to this IP address. And that's like the internet address, that's like a phone number for that particular location. It's telling FastTrax where to send that data to. And generally, that's going to be the public IP address of that store. There would be some port forwarding done at that location, and it would be sending to the database machine, which is generally registered 1 at that location. If you're on a VPN, that could be a VPN address. If you're utilizing dynamic DNS, that could be a dynamic DNS address. All 3 ways are supported. The account code field. This is going to be utilized on accounting exports, basically every single accounting export. This account code is going to map on that file export to the store number. So in the accounting software, you're always going to have your stores designated to a specific accounting code. This is where you're going to input that into Director. Next will be your payroll comp number. This will be utilized for the time clock exports. If you're doing a integration and an export for like Paylocity, this would be the store's identification number in that software. So your employees would have their employee number, their name, their time worked, and then they'd be mapped to this number for that export. Then you have your employment identification number. You'd input that here. Finally, we have our store group. This is where we're going to assign our store groups. So those groups we created a couple minutes ago, over here, we can assign those to stores here. So I've got some already pre-assigned. Let's say I'm going to assign this to store group number 3, these last 3. And as shown at the beginning of this webinar, the main benefit to this is now whenever you want to run reports, send down queue changes, things like that, you can do this by group. So instead of doing it by price by zone or individually clicking these, I can choose by group. I can choose the group that I want to check and then check all of those. So that's going to make that a lot easier to manage. Now going on to the store area, we have our POS flag age requirements. And this is going to be used on POS flags if you're utilizing anything other than the age required of manual. So if you're using like the alcohol or the tobacco or the other flag, this is where if you have that POS flag set for that, you would set that value here on the store itself. And the store, when sending down from corporate, the store is going to utilize that age for that particular POS flag. Now this is optionally set 1 by 1 per store, or you can do this by mass. For more details on POS flags and how they function, I'd suggest you watch the POS flags webinar. And then finally, there's going to be the enable invoice excise tax. And this will probably be grayed out for most people if you're utilizing excise taxes that are being applied to items via the receiving action, receiving invoices. You have to first enable that feature. That's where we go to settings, our inventory, and we enable the invoice excise taxes. For details on how that invoice excise tax works, I'd suggest you watch the invoice excise tax webinar. You'd simply just choose that checkbox to enable this, and then choose the store's rate that's going to be applied, and then the name, and then if that store is going to charge a tax on like surcharge fees. And then last but not least, whenever you need to mass change and mass add stores to like buy downs or discounts, there's an extra cogwheel button here that whenever you select this, it allows you to mass assign vendors, discounts, buy downs, commissions, and loyalty campaigns. you can simply choose one store. Like I've chosen store 4 here. And I can copy all the values that are assigned from store 1, and it would automatically populate all those checkboxes for those particular campaigns and discounts. This is a fantastic tool whenever you are rolling out with Fast Tracks and you're having to add new stores. Instead of going through and manually assigning everything one by one via their respective modules, you can just do this by mass by copying another store in its price book zone or another copying from its group. There's also the add to queue option here, and that does exactly that. If you choose that, it's going to add those records to the queue, and you can optionally have the delete command go first. So it would, of course, when you're sending that queue down, it would first clear that data out for those applicable fields and then send the new data down. Okay, so I hope everybody learned something new today. Once again, these webinars are every Friday at 9 a.m. Central, 10 a.m. Eastern. You can see a list of these if you go to our website, goftx.com, choose the webinars button, and then look for the webinars here. You can see recordings that were previously done, sign up for the new webinars, and then choose the notification for email on the upcoming webinars and Fast Tracks news. If you have any questions on this topic, let us know at websupport@fasttrackspos.com. And if you have any suggestions on future webinars, let us know at info@goftx.com. Thank you and have a great weekend.